Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, back on another hot Texas day to talk more about the Wood Elves. I hope you're all doing well. I'm not going to linger too long. If you want an explanation on how we're handling this little series and all that, you can hop back to episode 1. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it and hopefully keep this one less than 40 minutes. So, as I established in the first episode, the order that we're going to be going in is a new legendary character, followed by a new character, followed by 2 potential new units, followed by a new mechanic. So, let's dive into it. The character I'm going to be talking about today for the named character, or special character section, is going to be Queen Ariel, the Queen in the Woods. Now, Ariel is a pretty interesting character from a gameplay perspective, because while she is without a doubt the single-handedly most important character in the Wood Elf lore, in that if you read Wood Elf lore, it literally all revolves around Ariel, and like each of their ages, like when they determine major eras to start and end, usually has to do with Ariel. She has not been playable in Warhammer Fantasy for many years. The last time she was actually playable was in 6th edition, but even then she was not actually included in the 6th edition Wood Elf book, but instead, the last time Ariel had a conventional model and rules in a book, I believe, was 4th edition. And then if you still owned her model when 6th edition came out, Games Workshop back then on their website basically included rule updates for certain models that were still around that would allow you to play them in those editions. And Ariel was one of the characters who received such an update, so it was possible to take her in 6th edition, but I don't even think you could buy her model in 6th edition. You had to already have owned it from some other source. But in any event, let's talk about how she might be brought to life for Total War Warhammer. Now, it should not be a secret that I personally am really hoping that Ariel will not be a legendary lord. I hope she will be more of a legendary hero to function like Lord Croak did, where instead of being a starter character that you pick up who leads a single army and she has like her own faction rules and stuff, I hope instead that she's a character who sleeps within the Oak of Ages, so to speak, and you have to accomplish some kind of mission or quest that once you do will unlock her for your faction, where she'll be available like Lord Croak is. That way you can have her just show up and attach her onto any army you want, so she can be where you need her to be, and it will allow her to be a lot more flexible and have a lot more interesting uses than just a lord. Because at least in my opinion, lords tend to be much more strict than heroes unless they have like really fancy faction mechanics, kind of like Deathmaster Snitch or Ikit Claw. But for Ariel, I think her having just super powerful army buffs like Lord Croak would be the most appropriate way. But enough of that, let's go ahead and dive into how she would actually function. So first and foremost, Ariel is very much like Orion. She is a larger-than-life demigod, essentially, of Athel Loren and the Forest. And there's a lot that comes with that. First is she's quite large. She's roughly the same size as Orion, where they're both they're monstrous sized would be the best way to describe them. Where she essentially stands roughly his height, but where Orion has the themes of a stag with his hooves and his antlers, Ariel instead has the motif of the butterfly queen, essentially from Shakespearean plays and stuff, or really old myths, I'm sure is where Shakespeare pulled it from, where she has these immense butterfly wings coming off of her back, which give her a really ethereal and enchanting appearance. She is supposed to be a not the best fighter. Like, Ariel can handle herself in melee in the sense that she could like easily kill a man, like super easily, but she would struggle against like a competent fighter or a creature that is well suited to combat. You would not want Ariel out there fighting against like Krokgar or Grimgor or even like Tretch Craventail. Like, you really wouldn't want her out there trading blows. Her focus instead is as a general and a wizard. Ariel is without a doubt one of the strongest casters in all of Warhammer Fantasy. Like, she's up there, and it's because she's literally the avatar of a god. You know, she is the avatar of the elven goddess Aisha, who is the mother of the elves and goddess of nature and a bunch of other nice, warm, fuzzy things. But, of course, that means she possesses the power of nature's wrath, which is very, very scary. And so, when Ariel takes to battle, she, being kind of a fey creature, is noted typically as having multiple forms, essentially. So, when you're dealing with Ariel, she has different aspects, I guess would be the best way to describe it. So, when she takes to war, she usually wears her elemental form, also known as her battle aspect, where she basically starts glowing and she gets really scary and spiritual looking, and it allows her to just obliterate people while also moving through even the nastiest terrain unhindered. So the first thing is that Ariel flies. But I don't think Ariel is going to fly in the traditional fashion, where she's like literally a flying character going around the map, because that exposes her to a lot of vulnerabilities that you don't want on a character. It's kind of like Malagor. Like, you could have her fly, yes, but you also, it's difficult to protect a flying character. More than likely, I think she's going to be like Sartorial and Malagor, where she's on the ground, but, you know, maybe she hovers a little bit above the ground, like the Fey Enchantress does, or like her wings, or maybe she has like a special animation where if she were to charge, she would flap her wings. But I don't think she's going to be like actually flying in the air the entire time, just because that comes with more problems than help, especially on a wizard. But her elemental form is the first ability we're going to talk about, and the elemental form literally just means that Ariel has Strider. So, and for the record, most of the rules I'm going to be going over to describe how I think she'll function are coming from the 6th edition update she got. In 4th edition, the only thing Ariel really had of note was that she had a ton of magic items, almost all of which have been recycled in later editions to be like generic items, like the Acorn of the Oaks of Ages, which we talked about in my Throt video. That was actually a Ariel item originally in 4th edition, and then in later editions it was basically spread out. And I think like she had another magic item called the Wand of Witch Elm, I believe, that also became like a generic Wood Elf item, I believe, in 6th edition. But in any event, let's keep moving. So she'll have Strider, which is great. Granted, she's a flyer, so that you'd figure that would be built in. But another rule she has that's really, really nice should be called the Aura of the Fey Queen. And the Aura of the Fey Queen should basically just provide a big leadership buff to nearby allies. Because in Tabletop, it made you immune to panic, but we don't really have panic in Total War Warhammer. That's not one of the rules that was carried over. But panic was basically a rule where if you took like a lot of damage very suddenly, or were charged from an unexpected angle, your units had a chance to like break and run because they're like, oh, this is bad. So I could see the Aura of the Fey Queen simply being just a flat leadership bonus while Ariel is alive. You know, maybe like a +6 or +10, depending on the situation. It could probably be like 40 meters. I don't think it'd be map wide. Maybe even just 30 meters because it was only a 6-inch range back then. Another rule she has that I think could be really, really interesting if they were to interpret is called Earthbind. And Earthbind basically represented that, you know, Ariel controls the forest and the very laws of nature itself, so nature is actively helping protect Ariel. So, like, while people are trying to attack or charge or pursue her, like, the very terrain, like, roots and vines start shooting up to trip people down and, like, hinder their movement so they can't catch up to her. So I think the cool way to do that, and also to, like, help protect her if she's falling back from combat or being charged by Cav would be to have Earthbind as a passive, where if enemies get within like 30 meters of her, or maybe it could be even smaller than that, but when they get close enough to her, basically they just get like a notable debuff to their charge speed animation. So, you know, kind of like how there are some abilities in the game that are like, oh, charge speed minus 72% or minus 40% or whatever. Maybe for Ariel it could be something like she slows charge speed by 20 to 50%. So it makes those charging units not able to hit with nearly the same impact that they would normally. That could be kind of an interesting way to allow her to be a little better at escaping from pursuers. Beyond that, she of course is a forest spirit, so she'll have physical resistance, and she'll have immune to psychology, and she'll have magic attacks, which are all very, very nice. And then of course, she's a wizard. Now, when it comes to lores of magic for Ariel, I think if you had asked me a while ago what I would have wanted to see for Ariel, I would have been like, oh, let's give her the lore of Athel Loren. She can have the lore of Athel Loren. That'll be really fun, unique, and cool. However, looking back at the lore of Athel Loren, there's really not a lot to it. Like, there's really very, very little it does that is not already done by the modern lore of life or done by a different lore. So I think for her, it might be more interesting for her to have like a mixed lore, or to be like the super badass at a different lore. Like, you know, she's one of the only characters in the setting who can wield high magic and dark magic. That's super rare. Like, not even... well, like, Teclis could do that, but he doesn't, because Teclis refuses to use dark magic. And, like, the Dark Elf big characters much prefer using dark magic and refuse to use high magic. Whereas the Wood Elves are kind of stuck in the middle, and like we talked with the Spellweavers last time, they wield dark and light. Or, sorry, dark and high magic. So maybe Ariel could just have a combo of dark and high magic, because that would be very, very unique. And depending on what spells you picked, it could actually be pretty powerful. You know, if you're running like Apotheosis and Soul Stealer, already that's like, ooh. But maybe as like a bound spell, she could have a single spell from the old days of, you know, Athel Loren. Like, maybe they could give her the Hidden Path spell as a bound spell. Because Hidden Path would actually be really strong, I think, in this game, where it basically gives you Strider. So, I mean, that could be really, really strong on certain units. You know, if you're trying to get, like, a big charge across, like, up a hill, so you don't take the hill penalty, you'd be like, Wild Riders, boom, you're Strider now, and just let them go ham. So that's certainly an option. Or, you know, they could give her, like, there was a spell called Ariel's Blessing, which Ariel's Blessing just gave you regen, so it was basically just a heal. So, yeah. You know, you kind of see the issue there. Oh, and of course she causes terror. Yeah, Ariel causes terror. She's very spooky and scary, because she's a big, angry demigod lady. Then when it comes to items, I'm not going to focus on her 4th edition items. I think there is a good chance we will see her 4th edition items. Because when Creative Assembly decided to interpret Lord Croak, they did so with his 5th edition profile. Which Lord Croak in 5th edition had 5 magic items. He had literally an item in every single slot. Whereas in, like, 8th edition, which Total War Warhammer is primarily based off of, he only had, like, 1 or 2. He, like, had his death mask, and that was pretty much it. So I'm hoping they'll do the same thing for Ariel, where they'll just give her 5 items. Because she has 5 items if you combine both of her versions. One of her items, the one item she had in 6th edition, was called the Heartstone of Athel Loren, which the Heartstone of Athel Loren basically it gave her magic resistance, which when you have physical resistance is always a plus. So she had really nice magic resistance, and then basically what it did, in tabletop it was a very nasty item, because it was essentially, okay, if you cast a spell and Ariel manages to cancel your spell, then or she manages to dispel your spell, then not only would she dispel it, but like the wizard would have to take a check, and if he failed, the wizard would end up losing a wizard level and forgetting that spell, which is nuts. that might be a little too much. So what I would probably suggest is maybe it could work similar to the some of the other characters who are good at like countering wizards. So she would be able to, like, whenever she casts a spell, that all of their stuff would go on cooldown. Or maybe it could just outright increase their miscast chance. That would probably be more thematic, I think, and a little more interesting. So Ariel having the Heartstone of Athel-Loren and just being on the field, she gets a magic resistance bonus from it, and it just, like, passively increases miscast chance across the battlefield. I think that'd be cool. Then for her other items, I actually bothered to go dig up my copy of the 4th edition Wood Elf book so I could actually find these items and figure out what they do to give an idea of what they might do. So the first one I'll talk about is the Berry Wine, which the Berry Wine is literally it's like this super incredibly potent brew or wine, obviously, that you create using magical berries in Athel-Loren, and it's so strong that you literally use an acorn cup to carry it because it's like that powerful. And essentially what it used to do is a single character one time, because there's only enough for a single sip, would take a drink and it just heals them a ton. So I imagine it would function very similar in Total War Warhammer. She could have an item for multiplayer and single player where she gets a one-use only heal, but it heals like a ton. That would be a lot of fun. You know, maybe it's fairly short range, so she could target it on herself or a nearby character. For her weapon, she has this really sinister thing called the Dart of Doom. Now, if you've watched my Heroes of Legend video for the Wood Elves, or you've watched my Drycha, the Briar Maven of Woe character feature video, you'll know how important the tree known as the Tree of Woe is. Because the Tree of Woe is basically this really important glade that was poisoned by the blood of Morgar, the Corruptor, the big bad beastman. And ever since then, that glade has warped into like a monstrous, mutated, desolate place. And the ancient tree at its heart was completely corrupted into something known as the Tree of Woe. And it's like a really, really sad, horrible thing. But Ariel has the Dart of Doom, which is a twig that has been broken off from the Tree of Woe, is fashioned into a dart. And basically Ariel carries it, and it's like this super intricate design, and she's able to literally throw it at you, and if it hits you, you're in trouble. Because not only is it like a freakishly magically charged bolt, so it will pierce your flesh or your armor very easily, but when it hurts, if it gets to your flesh, it literally drains the very strength out of your limbs. Like, it enfeebles you. It sucks all of your energy out of your body and just leaves you incredibly weak. So I can maybe see that being a cool thing where she has a active that she's able to use for the Dart of Doom, and when she clicks it and clicks on an enemy, she throws a projectile at them, and the Dart of Doom could maybe do a little bit of damage, but I think the cool thing it would do would just be to obliterate your weapon strength and armor-piercing damage for a period of time. Obviously, you wouldn't want it permanent like on tabletop, because that would be a little too much, but, you know, if it reduces your damage by like 50%, or 75% for like a good 26-30 seconds, that could be devastating if used at the right time. You know, you lure Durthu into a duel with Orion, or Durthu, and then as soon as Grimgor's committed with all his buffs, Ariel's just like, nope! The next one is the Acorns of the Oak of Ages. We've talked about that a bit during the Skaven video, but the Acorns of the Oak of Ages are basically the supercharged acorns with the magic of Gyran, which is the lore of life. and it allows them, when planted, like if you throw one of these things on the ground, it will literally sprout a full-size colossal oak tree and evolve very quickly into a small forest in a matter of seconds. Like, we're talking explosive growth. Now, to me, I don't think they're going to have an ability where you create actual forest terrain. That would be really, really cool. I just don't see that really being a thing in a Lord pack scenario. Because it would be cool if you could, like, choose an area of effect and that area suddenly counted as being forest terrain, considering the Wood Elves get so many powerful buffs, and obviously many enemy units take a lot of powerful debuffs. That could actually be really cool. Like, it's just this big fat area of effect that you throw down, and everything in that area of effect for however long counts as being forest terrain. So, like, enemy large creatures take the melee attack and speed penalty, but all of your Wood Elf units that, you know, have all these forest buffs suddenly get all their buffs. That would be a lot of fun. But more than likely, I think it'll probably, like, be a bounce spell. Maybe from, like, the Lore of Life. Something probably super simple. Like, maybe it could cast... Maybe if it's, like, one cast, you could get, like, a free Dwellers Below out of it. Or maybe if it's a bunch of casts, or, like, able to be cast multiple times, you could get, like, a free Awakening of the Wood out of it. Just some ideas. And then the last one is the Wand of Witch Elm. And I highly imagine that the Wand of Witch Elm is just going to be really straightforward. It's just going to give Ariel a lot of magic. So it's just going to juice up her magic power pool reserve and increase. It'll be like Teclis's sword in live, in the current system, where Teclis's sword now gives you magic instead of battle buffs. I think it'll be the same. It'll just give you, like, a massive amount of more magic to play with. And I think that'll pretty much wrap up Ariel. So I will say that although I really don't want her as a legendary lord, I want her as a legendary hero, at the end of the day, I just want Ariel in the game. One of the biggest things that I genuinely hated about the old edition, or all of the Wood Elf books that I grew up with, which were 6th edition and then 8th edition, because they didn't get a 7th edition book, was that Ariel was never playable. Like, in the entirety of my relationship with Warhammer Fantasy, you could not go to a Games Workshop store and pick up an Ariel model and play with her. Wasn't possible. You had to have picked up her model a while ago and then go on the website to download her rules for 6th edition if you wanted to play her. Which it just didn't make sense. You know, that'd be like having the Empire without a playable Karl Franz, or having, like, Dark Elves without a playable Malekith. Like, it was just super weird. Now, for anyone who's about to say it's not the same thing as the Phoenix King Finnebar. Finnebar had the ability to fight, but he wasn't like that great at it. Like, he was okay, but he was nothing compared to, like, Tyrion and all those guys. Meanwhile, Ariel is by far the strongest caster in Athel Loren. Like, nobody even comes close to her. So she should be out there on the battlefield fighting. Anyway, so that's going to do it for Ariel. So let's go ahead and move on to who I think the new hero will be. And I think the new character, because I'm doing Lords and Heroes for this segment. And I think the most likely option, and one that I really, 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 really hope for, is the Glade Captain. And my biggest reason for this is I think they've kind of been on a whole thing lately of giving us these heroes that we kind of missed out on for a lot of Warhammer factions. Like, a ton of Warhammer factions basically have a hero that's like a melee-focused fighter with good leadership abilities. Like, they're a mini version of the Melee Lord, essentially. And for whatever reason, they just kind of skipped them in a lot of factions. Like, the Black Orc Big Boss, the Skaven Chieftain, the Glade Captain, the Dark Elf Master. Like, those were all careers that really, really are good to have, but we just kind of missed out on them for a while. And I think Creative Assembly is rectifying that right now. So, Like, we very, very recently, of course, got the Dark Elf Master and the Black Orc Big Boss, and I think that trend is going to continue. I think that the free hero that they're giving to everyone who owns Total War Warhammer 2, I think that's going to be the Skaven Chieftain. And then I think a DLC hero we're going to see is the Glade Captain, who will be that for the Wood Elves. Now, the big thing about the Glade Captain is, of course, he is a Wood Elf melee-focused lord, which means I still think he'll have a bow, just because that's just what Wood Elves do. They all have bows. But I think he'll probably be the least impressive of the archer characters. So, like, he'll have a bow, and he'll probably be pretty accurate with it, but I don't think it's going to have any AP or do anything super-duper impressive on the shooting end of things. Meanwhile, I do think that he's going to be, like, a badass in melee. I'm thinking he's probably going to go Azrai Spear and Shield. To me, that seems like the most likely option that would help him, like, kind of fit different from all the other characters. So he'll have that big, nice shield. He'll probably be a little bit tankier than his fellows, but I imagine he'll focus more on being a leadership-centric role as opposed to, like, a hardcore tank. I don't think he's going to be tanky at all because he's a Wood Elf. So, like, sure, he'll probably have high melee defense, but he's probably going to have pretty garbage armor, bronze shield if he has a shield, but he'll be able to have mounts, which will be super cool. And for mount options, in Tabletop, they were able to take an Elven Steed, a Great Eagle, or a Great Stag, which I think all three of those will be available, because I think the Great Stag is going to be an available mount for the Glade Captain and the Glade Lords, because this seems like the perfect opportunity to put in the very last mount we're missing for the Wood Elves. But we'll talk more about the Great Stags in a little bit. For the Glade Captain, I think his biggest thing beyond having the Encourage aura is that he's maybe, hopefully, they're going to give him some kind of new ability similar to like how the Black Orc Big Boss has like a lot of really exciting abilities. I think instead of being, I don't think he's going to be a Guardian. I think instead of being a Guardian, maybe he'll have like leadership centric abilities. Like something where you can, or maybe something that buffs local charge bonus or something. But something where you can kind of put him with your Cav flankers, like your Wild Riders or your Glade Riders, and he's able to essentially spice them up a little bit. Or help them like keep fighting even when the situation is rough. Or maybe if you have him on foot, you stick him amongst your War Dancers and Eternal Guard so that he's able to throw around a buff that keeps them fighting even in nasty scenarios. I imagine that's going to be his main design, is kind of a... I think he'll be very, very good at dealing damage in close combat. I imagine he's going to have armor-piercing close combat damage because he has an Azrai Spear, which are, of course which have the armor-piercing rule. So I think he's going to be doing like really good AP in close combat, really high melee attack, really high melee defense, very low armor, probably not like the biggest amount of health, but you can put him on a nice amount of mounts, and he'll have at least a bow, more than likely. So that's pretty much it for the Glade Captain. Pretty straightforward, but I think still filling a critical role within the Wood Elf roster. The next thing I want to go into are the new units, or two new units that I think are potentially able to be seen in a DLC. The first one I'm going to talk to you about are, and both of these are what we would classify as Knights of Athel-Loren. The first one I'm going to talk about are the Wind Riders. So Wind Riders are the elites of the Warhawk Riders. But where Warhawk Riders, I think will, you know, the Warhawk Riders we have now are really, really bad at melee. Like, they have a really high charge bonus, so if you, like, get them a good charge from, like, a weird angle, they can be pretty deadly in a really desperate situation. They are much more intended to be flying around constantly shooting the entire time. I think Wind Riders are going to be a more expensive variant of the unit who are all about melee. So instead of being focused on, like, they might not even have bows, potentially. Maybe they will. But, like, instead of being all about having bows, I would see them instead having, like, Azrai Spears. Maybe not shields. Maybe they'd have, like, bows or just no bows at all. But they have Azrai Spears, so they have, like, really honkin' armor-piercing damage. and they're able to basically like descend from the sky and just absolutely wreck shop. So they've got that Azrai Spear. They could go like Azrai Spear and hand weapon or just a spear. But I would have their big rule on, they should have way better melee stats. Like, much better melee attack, much better melee defense. I would say no ranged weapon. That way they can really go ham on it. They should maybe have like some kind of Warhawk's Cry or Avian Shriek or something. Maybe they can like cause fear on the charge. But the big thing they should have is I say that they should have a rule called Predator's Descent, which is actually a rule that they had in Tabletop, which in Total War they just kind of represented it as, oh, okay, they have a high charge bonus. But I would actually make it an actual attribute that the Wind Riders have called Predator's Descent, which makes it so that when when they activate their charge animation, they get a notable bonus to their armor piercing and get an anti-infantry bonus. Because in Tabletop, Predator's Descent gave you Killing Blow, which meant that you ignored armor and could one-shot anything that was cavalry-sized or below. So cavalry, war beasts, or infantry, which I think would be awesome. So you just have these, like, horrifying birds of prey swooping down with these elven knights ready to just skewer people on their spears. Maybe they've got like one hand holding on and one hand ready for the spear, or I don't think they should have shields. They're not really known for having shields. They're not Pegasus Knights, but I would really like to see them be like a spooky unit that on the charge are just devastating and specialize in like flying down to swarm into heavy elite infantry like dwarves or chaos warriors and stuff by hitting them in like the rear and just wrecking shop before retreating back into the sky before they get tangled up in too long of a combat. I think that would be super duper duper cool and be a really, really interesting new unit. And that would kind of fulfill kind of the thing I talked about earlier about making sure to have like a nice non-magical AP unit. And then the last unit we're going to be talking about today are the Great Stags. So what is a Great Stag? Well, Great Stags are these colossal, majestic kings of the forest. Like, they are the true majesty and royalty of the natural animal life in Athel Loren, where they are very noble, proud creatures who are, they're forest spirits, so they have magical attacks. It's noted that there's like fairy flame usually dancing around their horns, and they are fiercely prideful and independent creatures that will come slamming into you and tear you up with their big old antlers or stomp you into the dirt. And they're big. Like, they're not deer sized, they're like moose sized. So they count as monstrous beasts, which means that they are very large and tend to have a much larger health pool. So think of them in like wood elf demigryph sized critters, which actually leads into a tirade I need to go into on another day. Not right now, save it for later. So the thing about Great Stags is we actually got an update on them in the Storm of Magic compendium that I want to talk about because it was really, really exciting. Because what we got introduced to us in the Monstrous Arcanum is, yeah, you could run them as a unit of feral Great Stags, but more importantly, you could run them as a unit, and in a lore blurb they introduced the concept of Stag Knights. So they say in this blurb that there are basically rumors and legends, which granted, it seems to be a joke about stag parties, like the name Stag Party in England, but it is a literal lore blurb that talks about that there is some group in Athel Loren that is a bunch of wood elf Azrai knights who ride on great stags, and they run around and they're known as Stag Knights, and they're like the most elite of the elite when it comes to the Knights of Athel Loren. And I would love to see that. Like, I want Bear Cav for Kislev, and I want Great Stag Cav for Athel Loren. Like, please give me Stag Knights. But being monstrous beasts, they of course are forest spirits, so they should have like a very handsome physical resistance buff to represent their more ethereal nature, because they have that kind of like aura, fey aura, that causes blows to go wide or missiles to be slightly deflected from them. And then they should be immune to psychology, because they just had the immune to psychology rule, so that's in there. And then they have magical damage, so they deal magic damage. And they had impact hits, which impact hits just meant that they hit really hard on the charge, like a chariot. So I imagine they would and they were very, very strong. Like, they were freakishly fast. So I imagine they would be the fastest moving of the monstrous cav. So, like, where demigryphs are very, very heavy, heavily armored, but they're really good in a prolonged fight, I would see great stags being much, much faster than demigryphs, but notably less armored, but just as good in a prolonged fight, but better on the charge. So, like, a great stag would have its improved movement, and then that, like, super sexy charge bonus because of their antlers, representing their impact hits, so that they just devastate on the impact. But, you know, being monstrous cav tier, they have a pretty nice health pool and are more than capable of fighting in a scrap, so long as they're not going against, like, really nice anti-large damage or a superior monstrous cav unit like demigryphs. Beyond that, I would note that I imagine they'll probably cause fear. I think it would be fair for them to cause fear, you know, seeing as they're monstrous beasts. So yeah, I would say they should cause fear. And I think that would just be super fun and interesting for the Wood Elves, without, like, breaking the bank, so to speak. But in any event, that's going to wrap up that portion of the video. So let's now talk about what I think would be a cool new mechanic idea. So the thing we're going to talk about today is a mechanic that I would really love to see implemented into the game, that multiple factions should be able to take advantage of, so to speak, at later dates. But it's teleportation. I would really, one of the core things about the Wood Elves as a race is that the way they primarily travel when going to war is they use something called the roots of essentially the world roots. Which the world roots are these planet-spanning roots of the Oak of Ages that connect it to many of the world's forests. And because Athel Loren is a living thing that has, like, a spirit and a consciousness and stuff that you can interact with, it is possible to essentially bargain with the forest. And by bargaining with it, it will allow you to travel the world routes. So you enter this kind of other realm, this other world, that takes you from wherever you were in a forest connected to the Oak of Ages to another forest connected to the Oak of Ages in a fraction of the time it would normally take. Like, you're there in a matter of, like, you could travel from Ulthuan to Athel Loren in a matter of minutes, hours, instead of weeks or months. So I think that would be really, really cool. And I think it would also help a lot with Wood Elves being a Mortal Empires race, or also a Vortex race for the Lord Pack group, where right now, you know, you want the Wood Elves to match their lore. Which, the thing about Wood Elves is that they're supposed to be a mostly insular race. They're supposed to be a race that rarely, like, charges out of the forest unless there's, like, a direct threat they need to deal with, or they're destroying, like, a group that's been over-harvesting the forest, or they're going out to, like, fulfill a prophecy or help an ally. But a lot of the time, they don't leave the forest, well, in a way that you would notice. Instead, they're able to kind of preserve their sense of mystery by taking the world route. So, you know, if they need to go fight somewhere in Nagaroth because there's something important going on there, instead of sailing across the world like plebs, they instead teleport through the world routes into one of the forests in Nagaroth that's still connected to the world routes, therefore popping up there and starting to do damage and stuff. So I think this would be a really bitchin' mechanic, where you basically have, like, special sites that the Wood Elves are basically able to teleport to. So you go to Athel Loren, you go to the Oak of Ages, and it gives you the option, okay, you can teleport to a forest in Nagaroth, a forest in Lestria, a forest in the Southlands, or a forest in the Empire, Laralorn. So you could teleport to Laralorn, or the Bowmen of Orion's War Camp, But to keep it balanced, I would heavily suggest it like having some kind of massive price. So maybe you have to have like a special resource to bargain with the spirit of the forest in order for it to let you do it. Or maybe it just costs a lot of money. Or maybe it has a cooldown where it's like a right, so you can only do it once every certain number of turns. Or maybe only your legendary lord can do it. Or maybe, make it so that you're not just constantly able to jump back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Because it should be something that you undertake because you need to, or because it's part of like a grander wide plan that you've been preparing for. Not just like, oh, on a whim, I'm just going to keep hopping a 5-stack army back and forth between Ethel Lauren and Laura Lauren because I'm too lazy to make another army and I'm trying to keep the public order manageable in these two places. Like, you don't want it to be a trivial mechanic, especially because the AI would be able to use it, and if you make it too easy to use, that could potentially cause dumb moments. But in any event, that's going to be all of my ideas for today. My objective to have this below 40 minutes completely and utterly failed, but I imagine for you guys that's okay, and for me that's just mildly annoying. In any event, I really appreciate you all watching. I want to give a very big special shout out to all of my patrons who have been supporting my work here. I really appreciate all that you guys do and helping me stay alive and be able to do everything that I need to do. And of course, a very special shout out to the most supportive, very supportive patrons: Sign of the Emperor, Higgins the Seagull, Eric, Jeffrey Ramers, Charles Bode, and Wendell Short Eyes. Thank you all very, very much for your generosity. In any event, that's going to be it for me today, guys. I hope you all have a lovely day, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for the next episode of Wood Elf Predictions, where we will be going over another Legendary Lord option, another new character option, 2 new unit options, and a new mechanic. There's 2 more of these. So in any event, let me know what you guys think down below. Are there any of the things that I talked about here that you think would be super exciting? Like you're like, oh man, I really, really want that. Or do you still prefer something from the first episode that we covered yesterday? I'd really love to know what you think. In any event, I'll talk to you guys later. See you tomorrow.